Okay, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Lauren Anthony. I'm a customer engineer in Google Cloud in the public sector team, and I'm delighted to host our panel on achieving robust protection against cyber risks in a data-driven, interconnected transport world. So the interconnectedness of integrated transport systems presents a complex cybersecurity challenge. Transport requires robust protection against cyber threats across all levels, from data collection and sharing to infrastructure management and passenger safety. So while ensuring operators and their suppliers comply with statutory, regulatory, and contracted demands. So conscious there's a lot to unpack, so let's kick this off. So to start, can I ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves? So Andrew.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Andrew Pettet. I'm one of the Google Cloud customer engineers who specializes in security within Google Cloud. So what does that actually mean? So I specialize in the various different Google Cloud products that specialize in security. So that covers our SIM product, which is security operations. I also cover Google Cloud Security Command Center, which is a sort of a holistic review of your entire GCP estate and also your other cloud services as well. And I also look after threat intelligence and incident response as well, so helping customers to understand sort of threats out there to their organization as well. Thank you.
Heather.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Heather Taylor and I head up the Applied Human Sciences group at Frazer Nash Consultancy. I am a behavioural scientist, a psychologist by trade, and the Applied Human Sciences team at Frazer Nash is made up of lots of behavioural scientists and very skilled human factor engineers as well. So we look at putting the human at the forefront of anything that we do. So we make sure that the importance of the human in the system is very much at the forefront of everything that we do within Frazer Nash. Thank you.
Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Cox. I'm the Director of Managed Services at Qodea. We're the largest Google First partner in Europe, and my team specialises in helping our customers get the best from Google Cloud Platform, GCP, Workspace, and that spans many areas, all the way from infrastructure and application management, all the way through to data, AI, and more recently, SecOps. So we do managed security services, SOC of the future, those kind of capabilities as well.
Cool. Rafay.
Rafay and Ansari. Good afternoon, everyone. So I work in connectivity and security, mostly around operational technology, cybersecurity, and I've been working on quite a few projects around the transport sector. And looking forward to an interesting conversation today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm not John. I'm Ben. So I'm a bit of a last-minute stand-in for John from KPMG, who's poorly. But I'm Ben Foulser. I'm a partner in our transport practice, and I lead our work in digital, sustainable, and inclusive transport. My team work with clients across the transport landscape, from authorities through to operators, on digital strategy and through into execution of projects. Clearly, cyber's a significantly important part of that, and absolutely we focus on secure by design with all of our clients, whether that be in specification or through into development and building of services. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, and welcome all. So we've heard in different areas about the evolving threats facing organisations and transport. So Andrew, let's start with you. Given your role and expertise, could you share the latest insights on key cyber trends and evolving threats for the transport systems that transport authorities should be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand you as an organisation, and I think that the transport sector has specific targeted attacks from certainly like nation-state things and things like that. And for us at Google, we have a whole range of security analysts within sort of just over 200 individual analysts looking at sort of the cyber threats that we see. We get that data from various different points within the Google network. We get that from our managed defense teams that have sort of individual sensors within customer organizations. We have a threat intelligence team that goes through the dark web and looks to see what chatter's going on. We have exclusive access into many threat actor groups to help us to understand and build out that profile. And what we generally see is, the Chinese are still fairly active in this space. I think just because of the nature of what transport represents to an organization or a company or a country, for that fact, you know, it's still being targeted by those nation states as a weak point, effectively. And to get a really big impact and really big headlines, we saw various different types of threats sort of occurring. I think they're still going after the standard sorts of things that we see, like the cyber-physical. We've actually seen some GPS spoofing attempts sort of happen at nation-state levels. We've certainly seen in Ukraine, where if you go above a certain level in buildings, the GPS signal goes off the chart, because it's becoming easier and easier for the sort of low-level people to be able to manipulate that data and influence the decisions around it. We've also seen a high frequency of network compromises, you know, looking at the transport network, what systems do they share across those platforms from an infrastructure point. You know, what are the weaknesses that we can exploit from those 0 days, you know? Are they using, you know, certain types of hardware and things like that we can exploit? Again, we're also seeing ransomware. I think, you know, we've all heard about it a lot in the press, but they're still actively targeting the transport sector, as we would sort of expect. But looking for unique pieces of software within the transport sector sort of helps you to get a better understanding of what are the risks, you know, understanding your supply chain, looking at the sort of 0-day vulnerabilities that are coming out. Has that third-party piece of software using those, maybe those third parties within that piece of software as well. And I think the other thing we're seeing is sort of widely distributed widely distributed malware, so specifically targeting malware to the transport sector, looking at specific, looking at your EDR within your environment. You know, what detections are you finding in that? Actually, that's a really good source of information, looking at your EDR and working out which pieces of malware have been detected. Are they associated back with a threat actor? Actually, are you being targeted by a specific threat actor in your environment as well? Other nations that we also see involved in this particular focus on transport is Iran and obviously North Korea as well. So obviously the three major threat actors that we see sort of playing up in this area.
Cool, thank you. I'm curious to hear how that resonates with the rest of the panel. Does anyone have any further thoughts that would you like to expand? What can transport authorities do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, just to add to one of the aspects, because we are talking about interconnected transport. So that does increase the threat landscape, because we are talking about interconnected, nodes. So as Andrew was mentioning, the threat landscape involves nation states as well as malicious insiders, malicious, outsiders. But one aspect that Andrew mentioned was about risks and how do you then, how do you respond to those risks? So that is something important with regards to the threat landscape. And one of the things is that you could have as much security as you want, but you really have to have appropriate and proportionate cybersecurity, because securing a nuclear reactor is different than securing perhaps a transport-related environment. So really the context matters, and of course the threat landscape around that matters as well.
Yeah, a couple of builds on that, thank you. I think as you look across the transport landscape, changes that have happened in technology in the past sort of 10 to 15 years are driving a very different threat profile. That convergence of IT and OT, where historically we've had all that operational technology like signaling systems and control systems, SCADA systems for lifts and escalators, all being kind of air-gapped off here to the side, is no longer the case. We're bringing them into the modern age. We're putting them onto cloud platforms. We're integrating them into our IT. And overall, actually, our service delivery models within organizations are changing as well. So our service delivery models rely on IT and OT. You can't sit in a control center now, today, and just rely on the OT, the control systems. You need to have your productivity systems. You need to have your comm systems, your phone systems. So you need to think about that whole service model. I think that convergence is an interesting piece. We talked about the connectivity of ecosystems as well. If you go to many of the other events that are going on in today's and tomorrow's conference, you'll hear about collaboration, data sharing, ecosystem plays, the need for systems to talk to each other. And that's not just in our own businesses, it's with our trusted partners, Google, Waze, TomTom, INRIX, you name it, and other, if you're a roads authority, other highways authorities. So you've got another sort of threat vector there. We're starting to see that introduction of things like edge computing into the architectures, and that provides another opportunity to get in as we're starting to see things potentially being injected into devices out on the roadside, which historically have been very isolated. And then it's interesting to think about some actual real-life examples. So you'll all be familiar and aware with Transport for London, who, oh, you might not be, but if you're not, suffered a significant cyber attack last summer, and it's still recovering from that attack now. And whilst I wouldn't want to speculate on what caused it, in some of the sort of circles, we've heard that it could have been a social engineering type attack, someone phoning up, trying to effectively convince someone within the organization to hand over credentials. So it's not even necessarily the most sophisticated of attacks we need to be concerned about. It's those unsophisticated ones. And then the final point I was going to make was just in discussion with two CIOs recently of very significant infrastructure authorities in the UK. They said to me, actually, we think we're doing pretty well in our own organizations, and to a large extent they are. It's the supply chains that give them the most concern. And both these organizations have quite complex supply chains of design engineers, like my colleagues here in the front row, and software providers and technology providers. And as you start going down the tiering of those supply chains from the sort of the tier ones, which are fairly well resourced and got money to spend on cybersecurity, down to the tier 2s, tier 3s, tier 4s, your maturity of the cyber posture significantly reduces. And it's the tier 3s and the tier 4s that present the biggest risks. So the complexity of the supply chain also drives that cyber risk. And that's something that our clients are really trying to get on top of, to actually work with their tier 3s and tier 4s in their supply chain to improve that cyber maturity.
Yeah, thank you. So just to follow up on that, are there any kind of mitigation strategies that you would kind of recommend transport authorities start looking into or do to kind of protect against supply chain and other threat vectors?
I think this is where the convergence point comes in, with IT and OT coming so much closer together. And that's where you've got to become more proactive as an organisation. Just traditionally, a SOC was more, you take the information as it comes and you deal with incidents as they occur. But to the point on threat intelligence, when you've got terabytes and terabytes, probably petabytes of data, you need a technology platform that enables you to make use of that threat intelligence in a real-time way. I think that's where tools like SecOps from Google and other platforms that we're all very much aware of come into play. Because to operationalize at that scale with that amount of data, be it threat intelligence or from OT and the IT SOC capabilities, there's a huge amount of data to process and understand and take value from. Again, EDR comes into that from your end user devices, which is arguably where a lot of these ransomware and malware attacks come from. So I think it's bringing that picture together in a holistic way, and that's really, when we talk about SOC of the future, that's really what we mean. It's how do you provide your organisation with that holistic end-to-end picture from user, OT, all the way through to your back-end services.
Yeah, and I'd also say looking at your attack surface and looking at your supplier's attack surface as well. What I've seen is a number of organisations start to scan their suppliers and hold them accountable. Like, what is your patching process? What is your, what are you going to let us know if you haven't patched something for a reason? Understanding and being able to hold that third-party supplier accountable for patching and updating those systems. Like, if your supplier's got a 0 day that they can't fix for 2 weeks because Joe's on holiday, because they're only a 4-person team, are you going to cut them off for a week until he's come back? Because that's a limitation into your system. Or are you going to put additional controls around that third-party supplier to understand the risk? What access do they have as part of that data? I think documenting, what data does that third-party supplier have access to, and monitoring it. What are they accessing, and how long are they accessing it for? And then if you see an anomaly, that's a really good indicator. Maybe the supplier's been compromised, or maybe you've got an insider threat at that particular supplier. But we certainly see nation states target those individual, the soft belly of the industry to try and get into those organisations.
Heather?
Thank you. I think one thing that we're all talking about the technology side of it, which is actually really important because that's one of the places that we can really grab that data, see and understand it. Part of that threat landscape is actually the people side of it. So from my perspective, I would always be looking when it comes to mitigations about are the people supported and actually how resilient is your organisation from a people and process point of view. So I would be looking at what are those vulnerabilities, whether they be cyber vulnerabilities or actually human vulnerabilities, so whether it be insider threat from accidental or malicious, as we were speaking earlier, to try and find out actually why would that occur. So is it due to there's an overload of workload for that operator, so they've missed it, or have they been compromised from a nation state to give them data because they're not happy in their job. So, you know, it's those sort of things that I think we need to, when we're thinking about it as a holistic process and system, those elements will actually just strengthen the technology that's going to be used and utilized. So, you know, it makes the technology efficient from a people side. So the people make that technology efficient rather than the technology be needing to be efficient in the first place.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. Just to add to that, so as Heather was mentioning, the holistic perspective, which includes people, process, and technology, all three aspects are important. And as an organization, what you could do is, as Andrew was mentioning, documenting, having a cybersecurity policy, and then establishing a cybersecurity program that includes all of these three aspects, people, process, and technology. That is something that organization can do as a start to secure their systems.
I suppose to round out, all very, very good points, have a clear recovery and resilience strategy. So that might be switching off access, as TfL did to its suppliers. It might be about cycling through your various different systems and doing the impact assessments. But I think it's really important to have a clear resilience posture. So what do you do to recover? And then, of course, have in place those tested procedures for recovery. Wargaming is really important as well. And wargaming, not only, to your point about the people side, I think, not only the technology recovery, but also what you do around comms as well. So the most important thing is to be calm, collected, and have a really clear communication strategy for how you then communicate with the market and what you do. As you'll have noticed with TfL, to their credit, there was no sort of emergency kind of comms out, oh dear, your data might have been compromised, because that would then just create a whole storm of issues and reduce trust in the system. In fact, actually, the data wasn't compromised, and it was about that clear, calm, collective behavior of when the incident did happen that then enabled them to continue business as usual and recover.
So thank you all for your insights into the threat landscape. Clearly, there's a lot that we need to consider, from people, process, tooling, systems, resilience. So on that note, transport operators and suppliers need to share data for operational needs. So how can transport operators and suppliers balance data sharing with cybersecurity measures? So let's start with Chris.
Okay. So, yeah, again, I think it's a challenging topic, and this is something we've been working on in central government for a while. There's a cross-government data platform for exactly this purpose, sharing data, and the approach there has been very much a central repository of data to share out. And the challenge there is always the governance, and as we're talking here, you're always one slip away from a breach or an error, you know, be that malicious or accidental. That's just human nature, unfortunately. I think the other way that you can look to tackle these things is more through some of the more modern capabilities available in the ecosystem. So you think about where users are accessing data and how they're accessing data, if you can really mitigate the risk as much as possible at endpoint. So I always think Chrome Enterprise Premium is a good example of this within the Google ecosystem. It allows you to completely control a user's browser to the point that they can't even log in to the browser if it's not running the latest version or the latest version -1. So, but the benefit of that is you've got a load of data loss protection or prevention capabilities within that, so people can't copy, paste, download data through the browser. And I'm a big believer in if you can really control your endpoint, that's often 90% of the battle, because everything else is just distributed to that browser. So if you can control the browser, you've got the right governance frameworks and policies around that to the point, I think that mitigates a huge amount of risk.
Yeah, no, definitely. Do we have any other perspectives?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, understanding the data that you have in your cloud, like Google has sensitive data protection, which you can just turn on as a feature, and it will scan all of your data within your GCP environment and look for PII data. So you'll know exactly where it is, you'll know which databases it's in, you'll know, you know, is it in a storage bucket that somebody's copied from a development standpoint. You know, the number of customers I talk to that have got these development environments where they've taken a clone of Live, and they're like, oh, well, do we need to secure that? Well, does it have PII data, or have you anonymized it? And if the answer is no, then you have to put the same controls around that database as you do as the one in Live. Because the insider threat, or that database being compromised, or the lever that's just left, that we didn't tie down their levers process, so they've still got access. They know no one looks at it. They know no one audits it. So that's where they're going to try and go and get that data. So I think that's something to be aware of as well.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, so I completely agree with all of those. I'm going to sort of turn the telescope around a little bit on this one, because it's interesting. About 4 or 5 years ago, the MOD developed a tool that they were then made available to government to look at whether data was correctly classified, correctly protectively marked. And when they ran the tool over most government departments, they found that most data was overly protectively marked. So we actually spend a significant and disproportionate amount of time and money protecting data that actually doesn't need to be protected as much. Now, clearly there are two sides of that coin. There's absolutely, you can't take your eyes off the data that absolutely does need to protect, your crown jewels. But also, we need to be careful about overprotecting a load of other data that, frankly, has little value, or it doesn't have a resilience impact or a liability impact if it's published. So I think it's about really, first order principle, being really clear what you need to protect and what you don't, and then make sure that you spend that incremental pound in protecting your crown jewels.
Just on that, I think it's actually really important to have that appropriate level of access, because if everything is all shut down, then people will use workarounds to try and get what they need to, because they'll try and send out something by email, realize that they can't do it, and they'll print it out and send it out that way, because those restrictions are too constricting in place. So actually, absolutely, having those appropriate levels regarding what data is needing to be protected at the highest level compared to the ones that don't need to be as protected, but then having, what you were saying, having those firewalls in place to make sure that that isn't then the easy access to the person that's got the lowest level of access, being then the conduit to actually being the way that a threat can enter.
Just to add to this conversation, one example from one of our recent projects, I won't name the client, but everything was security target level 4, which means to maintain that particular security posture is really expensive, requires a lot of resources. So I think appropriate and proportionate is the right, things to do, because you can't have everything security level 4 and you put in, billions of pounds just to secure something that doesn't require that much of security.
Yeah. So just on that note, Heather, so how would operators and suppliers address the human factors? So you mentioned about people trying to find workarounds. So how would they address that in their cybersecurity strategies?
So just on that point to start off with, I think the first thing that you'd want to do is actually just have a look at your processes. Are the processes fit for purpose? Are they easy enough for the user to actually follow? And do they not have too many steps? People don't like steps. They get confused. People then go, oh, I can't be bothered to do that. I'm going to do something else as well. I don't care about the cybersecurity aspect of it because it's interrupting my job. So, and I want to do well and want to do what I need to do. So I think having a look at actually the processes and seeing if they're appropriate, if they are usable, but also that end user that we're talking about, making sure that the system that you've got is actually usable for that end user, making sure that that user experience is actually a good experience for that person to engage with. Because if they find it frustrating and troubling in order to use a piece of technology, use something, they're going to find it harder to actually adhere to cybersecurity policies. Another aspect on that is actually that training and awareness aspect of cybersecurity is it's making sure that the people understand the importance of what happens. You know, what is the impact if I don't do this? What is the impact if I don't follow those procedures, don't follow that process? And actually seeing other people around you with those good cybersecurity behaviors is just going to enable and enforce those good proliferation of those good cybersecurity behaviors. So I think all of those elements factor into actually whether or not someone's going to feel accountable for their own cybersecurity behaviors, or whether or not they feel like they could speak up about someone else's cybersecurity behaviors. So if you're all sitting in a operation room and someone's not doing something, is the culture supportive enough? Do you have that just culture where you feel like, actually, no, I can report that person for doing something if they haven't listened, and say, I don't think you should be leaving your computer unlocked, or, you know, those sort of things all help with that cybersecurity.
So next question. So I'm sure we've all heard a lot about AI, and we know that AI can be exploited by bad actors, but it can also be used in the latest advantage to defenders. So can each of you share a little more on the steps we can take today in harnessing emerging technology like AI or IoT and cloud-based solutions within transport infrastructure? So Rafay, should we?
Yes, sure. So as you said, AI, IoT, it does bring in those new and exciting applications, right? But it does also increase the threat, landscape where we started from, and the endpoint security that you mentioned, because endpoints, all these IoT nodes, you have to protect them. So I guess along with these exciting applications, organizations also need to start thinking about when they adopt these technologies, there is an aspect of cybersecurity that needs to be considered at all levels. As we said, throughout the whole life cycle, right? Secure by design was one of the terms that was used. So whenever we use the term secure by design and you talk to a system owner, they are always like, no one designed the system to be insecure, right? So they always think about security, but then you need to make them aware that it's the whole life cycles, whatever the product or the software is, you need to think about cybersecurity whenever it is developed and tested and then brought into production environment. So just to summarize, many exciting applications for IoT, positioning, acquisition of data, matrix, that whole data that is really used for prediction through AI, but then you need to consider the cybersecurity aspects along with it as well.
So anyone?
I think a big question to ask yourself is how do you ensure that you've cast the net wide enough? And I don't know if people will be familiar. There's a story online. It was a while ago now, but there was an organisation, and they imposed a new cybersecurity strategy, and they thought of every attack vector possible, except for the IoT thermostat in a room that a hacker was able to manipulate, get into the network, and release a ransomware, and it caused them absolute havoc. And I think that's another part of this is how do you ensure your strategy is covering every possible device and way into your organization. Like you say, that's people, but it's also any device that can be plugged into a network these days. It could be a fridge, and it's making sure that you've crossed all those T's, dotted all those I's, and really understood what the attack vectors are.
I was just going to say, I think AI has its benefits in this context as well, especially you were referring, Chris, earlier to the SOCs and having a sort of threat detection landscape. AI can be used in that context for actually understanding attacks better, understanding and predicting where the attack vectors might come from. So I think we should be looking at it both as a risk but also an opportunity.
And I'd also like to say, I think one of the most important things when you introduce AI into your business, often they'll come to the security team, like, what is the guidance? And if you haven't written a policy that tells them how to use it and what to use it and what they can actually put into that data set, then your users are going to go off and do their own thing. And you won't be able to track it. You won't know what AI they're using. You won't be able to secure it. You won't be able to trust it. Before you know it, all of your data is online. They're using it to write custom code which you've actually created in-house. And all of a sudden, they've put it online just to get some feedback. And I've certainly seen that with other vendors where they've released code into the wild to get help, and then it's used that as a repository to help someone else. And all of a sudden you've got internal code that's suddenly exposed out there. So one of the first things before you even talk about AI within your organization is write that policy, let the people know what they can and can't do in your organization, and put security controls in to stop them doing what they shouldn't be doing. If they shouldn't be using, a Chinese-based AI company to upload PII data, then stop them from doing it. Because they're going to give it a go. As soon as they see it in the news, they come into work and go, oh, look what I found at home. Yeah, not okay in the workplace. The same thing, you wouldn't click on personal emails in the workspace, of course, but, people do it. So how do we tell them what they should and what they shouldn't do? We've paid into this AI infrastructure. Use this one because it's secure. It's managed by us. We look after it, and we've put the right measures in place around it.
I was just going to second that and say this is exactly what we've done in our firm. We've started internal. We've got our AI engine internally. We're pointing at a certain set of internal data, and we're getting users used to using that in the constraints and the confines of what we've done before, and then also understood the risks associated with it in our own sphere before we can then go launch into the wider world, which I think is absolutely the right way to do it.
I think one of the things that we've got to think about is if you're looking at using AI, you've got to think, well, why do I want to use it and what do I want to use it for? It should be emerging tech AI, all of these things should be used in order to aid that operator, that person in their job, rather than replace. And I think that's an important message that we should send to our workers, that we're not trying to replace, we're trying to aid and help. And I think when you're looking at, just to take sort of a different slant to it, but there's lots of AI that's out there at the moment, and you can think about implementing those, but where's that data come from? What is that data trained on? What are the biases within that data that we've got to sort of think about? And then when you're thinking about, well, maybe I'll develop my own AI, then kind of thinking, well, just because I can doesn't mean I should. So thinking about it from an ethical point of view, because the use of AI exponentially exacerbates any issues that you might have, because that data is learning on itself, and so it's just going to exacerbate much, much quicker. So you've got to think about that scope. So thinking about if you're developing those AI tools, how are you developing it, where's that data coming from, and thinking about it from that ethical point of view as well.
I think anything to help us complete those ever in lengthening pre-qualification questionnaires for tenders would be helpful. Yeah. I'll take that. Just actually, whilst I've got the mic, I was thinking, you mentioned about what people are putting out onto the internet, which I think is an interesting point, because we could have picked up with a human factors piece. Many years ago, we were working with a large rail infrastructure project in the UK, and in the spirit of innovation, the organisation was really keen to demonstrate what it was doing with digital twins and designs, and so put out its designs for one of the stations that it was going to be building, so people could see the power of digital twins and the power of design tools and how that was working. And of course, that design included all of the cable runs, HVAC systems, literally everything that you could possibly not want to share with people online from a security posture. So it's interesting that you can have the best security controls in the world, you can have the best technologies in the world to prevent that sort of thing, but that wouldn't have ever stopped this person going, my design's brilliant, I want to share it with the world. So that there's got to be a big social awareness point of this as well around what's acceptable and what's not. And I think you were talking about that earlier.
I think the challenge with AI is one of the most powerful tools that we've been exposed to in our generation. But looking after it and doing it sensibly is the most important way. Making sure you're backing a provider that knows about AI, knows how to secure it, and make sure it stays within your own enclave, like making sure it's secure, making sure your data is your data, that it's not being shared to someone else to help improve their engine or to help improve their method of transport. If you come up with a new engine within that AI, that needs to be your data. You don't want that to be used to improve someone else's model or to build a faster train or to build a faster bus. Making sure that data stays secure is just so important these days.
Yeah. So on that, innovation and rapid advancements of AI and other emerging technology is undoubtedly exciting. However, granted, there is a balance to be struck between innovation and robust and reliable security measures. So regulation, compliance, and governance can sometimes be seen as a barrier to innovation, but it can also be key in shaping cybersecurity strategies. So how can non-expert transport authorities strike this balance and mitigate cyber risks effectively? So, Ben.
So I'll make a start on this. And of course, there's a huge amount we could go into here. First and foremost, understand what are the statutory obligations that face every transport authority. So in the UK, I did this last year for one of our transport clients. You can absolutely tell me if I'm wrong here, but in my searches, first and foremost, there are sort of four main bodies that impact transport authorities. The first is the Department for Transport itself, through some of its regulatory and statutory instruments. The key one, interestingly, would be the Railways Act, which has a big cyber security point on it. The second is the Information Commissioner's Office through GDPR and the DPA. The third is the NCSC through the NIS directive, which most people will be familiar with, Network Information Services Directive. And then the fourth is the Cabinet Office, interestingly through the Companies Act and the Computer Misuse Act. So those are the four sort of guiding principles. Now, as NIS is kind of the really key one that drives a lot in the transport sector, and DFT is the lead for that, it effectively makes DFT the regulator for cybersecurity in the transport sector. So those four, as a transport authority or an operator, you should be not only familiar with, but they should be embedded throughout your organization and your processes. Then you'll then have a whole range of underpinning standards that will impact what you do. So if you take payments, you're going to be subject to things like payment card industry security standards, personal application security standards. If you process money, you're going to be subject to the banking regulations. If you're processing data, you're going to be subject to other data regulations. So first and foremost, just be conscious and confident in which regulations and standards apply to your organization. And then to your point around, do these actually stifle innovation, hold people back? I think actually you should turn the telescope the other way around and think, how do these enable me? How do these provide the framework to and the control sort of environment that I need to work within? And what can I therefore do within that? Because the concern would be, oh, it's an immediate blank, no, I can't do anything. No, they actually provide the guiding principles and the guardrails. So put those in place, make sure they're clear, and provide really clear guidance as to how they actually apply to your business. Don't just take them as kind of 30,000-foot overarching, terrifying sort of top-down regulations. These are the guide rails and the framework that our business works within that make it really relevant to your people.
Yeah. Some of the series of standards that we regularly come across, especially around operational technology, is the IEC 62443 series of standards to secure your industrial control systems. So as you were just mentioning, so those standards are made by experts from around different sectors. So they are there to support you rather than stifle innovation, and they should be taken as such. So those standards are a series of guiding principles that allow you to manage your cybersecurity posture, even if you are innovating in any industrial control system. So the point being that these standards or legislation, it exists to support you rather than stifle innovation. Of course, there could be some aspects which you would consider could stifle innovation, but generally speaking, especially around the IEC 62443 series of standards, they really help organizations in actually innovating because they have these, and we were talking about NIS2 directive, so it does talk about new and innovative technologies. It does also talk about AI as well, use of AI as well. So we should take these as enablers that help us to, develop new and innovative technologies.
I just have one build on actually, just reflecting on what you were saying. I have had an example, and I was talking about it last night of all times, in the payments industry. There are certain standards you have to adopt, and there are certain standards that you can choose to adopt. And it's really important you understand the difference between the two, and then make a risk-based decision a risk and reward, actually, based decision about whether you adopt the voluntary standards. So in payments, if we think about how we take card payments for transport and then flow all the way back through to the back office and acquirers and banks, you have to apply the payment card industry standards. You could also choose to apply P2PE, point-to-point end encryption, in that. Now, that clearly is an additional layer of security. It has benefits, but it also has drawbacks, which have a significant knock-on impact to the infrastructure that you put in place and the costs of managing that, having to rotate keys every couple of years and having remote key injection and boring stuff like that, which I won't go into much more detail on. But it can add significant costs and might not actually yield that much more reward. So there's, be clear on the difference between the statutory or the mandatory and the voluntary as well.
And I also think having regular testing from partners that know what they're doing, like if you're not sure, then get one of the Google partners to come and help and do an assessment, and then get that rubber stamp from them. You know, they are experts in their field, they know about compliance, they spend their life doing this. So if you're concerned about your organization, where it sits today, but compliance is not going to make you secure. No offense to people that write compliance standards, but you can be compliant and not secure, but you can't be secure and not compliant. Does that make sense? So if all of your assessments and everything come back to say that you're secure, you will be able to meet your compliance standard. But just because you've targeted you've targeted your security assessment to meet the compliance doesn't necessarily mean you'll be secure. But if you design security in at the beginning, it's going to make it cheaper to be able to implement. You're going to have that layer of confidence within your organization that you've built it with security in mind. Get those risk assessments done early by somebody who knows what they're doing. If you don't have someone internally, either pay for someone to do a risk level assessment or get the experts in again. I think it's so important to do that as part of that design phase and getting the experts in early.
Yeah. Thank you. So Heather, given your expertise, what would you recommend to transport authorities in encouraging cybersecurity awareness and best practice among transport staff and stakeholders?
I think that's a really interesting question, and basically it comes down to how do we get people to do what we want them to do all of the time, and we're never going to be able to do that. So if we think about, essentially you're looking at trying to change people's behavior or promoting good behaviors. So if we think about behavior in itself, we think about a typical behavior theory is thinking that there's three underlying factors to actually what you see as exhibited behavior. So you've got motivation, capability, and opportunity. So if you understand what your person's motivation, capability, and opportunity is, you'll be able to understand their exhibiting behavior. So if you want someone's behavior to change and you feel that, they might be financially motivated, they might be more aligned to a financial incentive. But if someone's really proud and actually is looking at has got really good work ethic and job ethic, and they want to do a good job, and they may see praise and recognition as a good motivator for their behavior change. So I think when we're thinking about organizations as a whole, we need to think of how would people want to be rewarded for their behavior change. And you can do that in many ways. And then you can think about, well, actually, what's the best way of increasing their awareness? So we look at training strategies and things like that. And many people learn in many different ways. So it might be the way that you're thinking about how you're delivering that training. In what way? Is it visual? Is it text? Is it through videos? Is it through gamification? Making it interesting for people is actually going to aid that compliance in behavior change. So there's lots of different strategies that you can implement when you're looking at trying to adhere to good security behaviors. So we're looking at process. Is that process appropriate? So that links into that capability and opportunity aspects of things. You're looking at, does someone have enough knowledge about what their cybersecurity is to know what they're doing? Do they have accountability for themselves? Do they think that it's important for me to follow those rules? Do they understand the impacts of that? So thinking about them as a person that would react to different situations and triggers, and thinking about how they would react to those is actually quite important to the types of mitigations that you'd want to put in place.
So opening that up to the panel, would anyone like to build on that?
We've found generally, whether you're talking about cybersecurity strategy or how you're going to roll out AI in your organization, bringing people along for the journeys, that I think is the important thing. Business-wide change management, and how do you orchestrate that? And if you can get people to buy into that, you start to find, whether it's an AI champion, a security champion, you start to build that capability within the organization. And we found that's a really strong way to get the buy-in, but for also to help people understand, and also help the leadership teams understand what are the barriers, what are the challenges that the day-to-day team members are going to see, and that might make them deviate from policy or what it might be. So for us, that buy-in and bringing people along on the journey has been hugely successful.
I think just to build on that, leadership's actually a really important mitigation. So if people feel comfortable and safe in the environment that they're working in, and they feel recognized in what they're doing, they're much more likely to do what you ask them to do. If they're feeling neglected or disgruntled, and that leadership can actually pick up on that much, much earlier than anyone up here. You know, your immediate line manager will be able to pick up if there's any outside stressors that might be worrying someone. So thinking about that human as a whole person, not just how they are at work, and actually thinking about that, I think leadership's a real key to that. Yeah.
I think I'll go back to my secure by design point earlier for that kind of end-to-end, because I think that's a really important part. There are certain things you find, I've been doing this for 20 years in transport, there are certain things that are always add-ons to any project, design project, digital project, infrastructure project. First of which is cyber, and second of which is equalities impact assessments for disability. And consistently, you see the same thing over and over again. And nominally, it's because we just haven't quite got our stage gate process right, and design authority processes right. And that's really important. So governance throughout your design process is absolutely critical. At what point do you ask your cyber design or cyber architect to actually review it? Is it at the point about 2 minutes before it goes live and you say, please can you have a look at this? Or is it actually right up front in the requirement specification for it, and then at certain stage gates to make sure that it's been done properly? So I think that's the first thing. It absolutely gets cyber embedded. So it's not an afterthought. It's just part of the process. And then the second point is, I think, to the human factors part. Absolutely agree with the leadership. There's also training and really making it real. Unfortunately, I still see in a lot of places it being too conceptual. It's too much of a blue sky risk. Use case studies, bring it to life, make people understand it, and actually do put people through those wargaming scenarios, because ultimately the vast majority of people will have to be involved in some form of resilience or recovery if something happens. So actually get them through that process. So I think there's a couple of things. And then the third thing was, I suppose, going back to my original opening statements around supply chain. I completely agree that it's really important to measure the competency of your supply chain and make sure they're patching frequently, etc. But especially for our tier 1 infrastructure authorities here, the National Highways, the Network Rails, the Transport for London's, Transport for Greater Manchester's, actually we have such complex supply chains. It can go down to Dave, who makes the signs for TfL up here somewhere in Stockton, that actually, how do we help improve the whole posture, the whole maturity of the supply chain? And that's an investment that's worthwhile making.
Yeah, so to kind of summarize, I'm hearing kind of driving behavior is that hierarchy of need for the person as a whole, that bringing that supply chain and stakeholders earlier on in the process as well for security, and kind of systematically as a whole with people, process, and technology. So to close, I would like to invite each of the panelists to kind of summarize their key points on how transport authorities can achieve robust protection against cyber risks. So, Andrew?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about understanding your supply chain and then understanding the people and process. I would encourage everyone to go out and build their own cyber threat profiles. They understand their risks posed to them as an organization. Whether you do that yourself through open source intelligence or you engage with Google partners to do that for you.
Cool. Heather?
No surprise, I'm going to say people are your most important and your biggest strength when it comes to thinking about cybersecurity. So think about the human at every single stage that your process involves, right from the very beginning all the way through to that end user and how they're operating things.
Yeah, I think for me, it's establishing those endpoints, known or unknown, be it a thermostat, a laptop, or a device in Dave's sign business for the TfL example. I think it's really understanding where those weak points could be, and to the behaviours point, really getting buy-in from the organisation at all levels for whatever it is that you're trying to do.
I think it's a joint effort in an organization. So cybersecurity team can't work in a silo. So in my experience, I've managed to antagonize RAM's team, safety team, because this interaction between these teams wasn't that strong enough, and they didn't realize that why is cybersecurity trying to contact us or have those risks cross-referenced, for example, in a hazard log for safety team and in our cybersecurity risk register. So it's a joint effort within an organization, and this is what the organizational culture needs to develop, that there are responsibilities of individuals within different teams, and then they collaborate to maintain an overall cybersecurity posture.
I think it's a combination of two things: understanding your end-to-end architecture, and I mean that, I mean literally from, as you said, Chris, the device level through to the end outcome, and also your service delivery model. So on that device, think even down to the component level. Where do the components that sit in that camera, that POS, that whatever it is that's on the IoT device, where do they come from? And am I comfortable that they're secure all the way through to the end point in your architecture? And that service delivery model, really understand how IT and OT work together to deliver your end-to-end service, and make sure that you fully understood the cyber threat and then the resilience and recovery procedures for that whole service, not just a technology within it.
So I want to say a huge thank you for all your valuable insights and taking your time to talk today. So we would love to welcome any questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions for our panelists. Oh.
Thank you. Within the transport industry, for decades, we've talked about safety and safety first, and safety has been, and to Heather's point, if you're not holding on to a handrail when you're walking down the stairs, somebody will stop you and tell you to hang on to. So why are we having such a problem taking that safety message through into the digital landscape?
Can I start on?
Yeah, of course.
It's right. This is sort of close to my heart, because there absolutely is. There's, I work in safety culture as well as security culture, and actually there's such a massive difference. And to me, in all of the industries that I work in, it seems to be that safety, there's more of a physical harm aspect to it, and so it's a much more imminent threat to yourself, to your being, than security, which is someone else's problem. That someone else can do that because that's not me. Unless I'm a security person, then that's not my responsibility. And I think a lot of the issues that we have within organizations is safety is always everyone's problem. It's always your problem because you are the one that's going to cause it or help not cause it, protect it. Whereas cybersecurity, we've got security professionals. They're the ones that do that. I don't need to do that. So it's actually having your people be aware that actually it is part of their responsibility, and they are part of, if they're not part of the solution of helping protect that system, then they're going to be part of that problem. And how do we change that? So that's, from my point of view, that's what I've seen.
I think what can be highlighted is exactly that interface between cybersecurity and safety. So you can have cybersecurity risks that impact safety. So that is where you need to, pinpoint and highlight that Safety cannot just work in silos, so there could be cybersecurity risks that impact safety, and we deal with them generally within the transport sector whenever we are doing the risk assessments. So that is something that needs to be highlighted so that everyone understands the importance of that.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, I think we've got one over here.
Thank you. Yeah, so I really liked your points about kind of AI and like making sure you've got your security in place before you've got kind of your AI tools rolled out. How does that work? I feel like there's a lot of like businesses and like local governments and stuff that have let AI get ahead of them, and people are like, well, I just use ChatGPT, or like there's such a proliferation of AI tools. Like, assuming there are many people who haven't done that and got their kind of foundations in place, how do they put the genie back in the bottle? How do they take these tools away from people and turn that into a regulated landscape rather than like a, oh, I stuck all my data into a Chinese AI, I'm sure that's okay, right?
Does anyone want to? Andrew?
I suppose it depends how aggressive you want to be. You know, because I've spent over a decade in security, as far as I'm concerned, cut them off. Because it's the easy answer. You know, it's a couple of clicks in an IPS or your network firewall or your outbound interconnect action, and they lose access overnight. Now, the psychologist next to me is going to tell me that's probably not a great idea, and that's probably going to really damage my relationships within my organisation. So gently, it would be my suggestion. Number one, write the policy. So I can't really do that tomorrow until I've got a policy to say, look, I've told you don't do it. There are different ways of implementing sort of blocks within an organisation. So you can say, I'm going to warn you to say, don't do it. And I can then track that data, and the people that are still doing it, I can then say, look, do you really need to do this? There's a better way of doing it. And we've secured and paid for this AI service, so please use this one. If they need coaching and training and enablement, then that's the way to do it for me. But yeah, block them to start with.
So just on that, I wouldn't recommend blocking.
No.
But I'm not technical, so I don't even know if you can actually do this. But I would put in something that would, which would nudge their behaviour. So I would put in, if they're opening up ChatGPT on their system, I would put in something going, make sure you don't put any confidential data in this. You're not allowed to do this. And make sure they have those messages when they're doing something in order for them to go, oh yeah, I'm not really meant to be doing that. It just gives them a bit of a breath before going into doing something. With those policies and procedures, absolutely get those in place, but actually trying to think about, because genie back in bottle is never going to happen. So how can we try and get our employees to use it responsibly? And it's more about that education and awareness about, well, where is my data going? What impact will that have on the company, on myself? And trying to think about it in that way. So I would put in those sort of nudges of flash pop-ups that everyone hates, but you know, they give people a breather.
And most people will stop at that point. At the moment you put a warning up to say, don't do it. You know, Google has something called safe browsing in Chrome, and says, you know, this is a potentially dangerous site, don't do it. Most people won't. The people that are going to say, yes, do it anyway, you're going to have a different issue with your employee.
Yeah.
Like,
And they probably already know what they're doing, so actually it might be thinking about that leadership aspect of things, going, well, why are you doing that? Actually, there are better ways of doing it, but that would come more from that leadership mitigation.
Do we have... Oh, we've got another one.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier how cybersecurity shouldn't be a barrier to innovation. How do you best foster an environment where that's sort of everyone's idea, and kind of whose responsibility is it to create that environment?
So I think first and foremost, I go back to my point about guardrails. It's about being able to articulate the guardrails that operate within the environment you're in and why they operate in that way. So a common understanding of risks and why we do things is really important. But also, then I suppose beyond that, to making sure you can innovate within that, I think it's about providing the environments where people can do that. So that might be a physical environment, it might be a technological environment, it might even be a kind of psychological environment where they feel able to do things. And you know, even in the grandest sort of macro scheme of things, in the West Midlands, we have a transport regulatory sandbox, which is a place where we can actually go and trial new technologies and innovations and get derogations, get dispensations for certain standards and regulations. Now, I'm not suggesting we throw everything in caution to the wind and we say, right, no cybersecurity regulations, we're going to go and trial this brand new bit of technology here. But yeah, there are different things on the continuum where you can go from effectively, you've got to do it within the guardrails, you can do it with some dispensations, or you can do it in an open way. Interestingly, if you look at Network Rail, I really like the way they set out their standards. So they have effectively 3 tiers in all of their operating standards. And there are the things that absolutely are mandatory. You have to do them, you have to apply them. The next tier down is they're sort of amber rated, very, very strongly recommended, and you have, sorry, beg pardon, mandatory, but you can get dispensation for them with a very, very clear business case. And then the kind of the last tier is stuff that we really recommend you do, but they're guidance. And that's kind of in all of their operating procedures. And that's a really nice way of saying, look, this is absolutely the red line over which you cannot cross. And if we could do the same, and yeah, these are the things where you can potentially do so. If we could apply the same sort of posture with security, that might be quite an interesting way of looking at things. And then, of course, so just providing the clear guidance as well.
I think there was a question in the middle there.
So you mentioned previously we need to have appropriate cybersecurity measures for appropriate levels of sensitive data. So is there any guidelines or principles, or the software you mentioned that MOD developed that help us to categorize and assign appropriate security levels for different data?
So that particular piece was looking at HM security classifications, so official, secret, top secret. But in terms of your how you protect data, that's going to be largely down to your, notwithstanding NISD and the actual regulations that already exist, Data Protection Act, GDPR. You should theoretically, if you're being good at information stewardship, have a good, clear understanding of what data you hold already. And in fact, actually, I think back to mid-2010, so maybe 2014, 2015, there was a really fantastic bit of work done by the Cabinet Office on information asset management and information asset assurance, which somehow seems to have gone into the ether and disappeared, which I would strongly recommend people look back on, because it effectively said, if you understand your information assets and you've got information asset owners, you should be able to do information risk assessments, and you should be able to understand kind of the criticality of that information to the operation of your business. This is not to dabbing Crowley Sweet's credit in National Highways, it's not about valuing your data, it's about understanding the criticality of it for the operations of your business. And that's the thing that should be driving what how much you want to protect that data. It's that you start with that clear understanding of what information you hold, then what's critical to the business, and then next step might be what liability do I have associated with that data, from a regulatory perspective, from a standards perspective, just from a purely legal perspective. And then you classify it accordingly.
I think you can also put additional compensating controls on your data. Once you understand where your critical data is, like work out the key fields within your database. You know, if you've got dates of birth and PII data, does everyone need access? You know, restrict the controls of who has access to the PII data. Do I need to encrypt those individual fields within the database? So if that database is compromised or lost, well, it doesn't matter because they haven't got that additional key to decrypt those critical fields. Yes, I've lost the data, but actually the value to that data in the dark web is less and less. So understanding where that data is, putting additional controls in that database to protect it and make sure that only the right people have access to it. Like the person that does the backup Do they need access to access the data, or do they just need access to back up the database? If they have the ability to restore the database, what field should they be able to see as part of that restore? So understanding that process as well, I think is critical to making sure you're managing your data at each stage as well.
Yep. Do we have any further questions? Oh, we've got one here.
You've talked a lot about AI and the manifestation of AI in the industry. That same AI is being used by the threat actors and so on and so forth. So how do you sort of stay one step ahead to ensure that whatever you're doing, you're well protected from the use of AI as a threat?
Who wants to take that question?
Who's brave enough?
I would say AI is built into the majority of tools now, whether you're looking at Salesforce or, A, B, C, or D product. Organizations and product businesses are building AI in, and I think this is where, and I touched on this earlier with threat intelligence from Mandiant and Google, is you're leveraging AI in understanding that data, because in the background, masses of AI are being used to make sense of that data across different industry verticals, across different attack vectors. So for me, I think it's understanding which technologies are leveraging AI in the right area for your use case, be that security or something else. So I think that's where I would look, is leveraging best-in-breed AI within products like Google SecOps.
Yeah, I think threat actors are using AI in different ways. They're using it to develop better phishing attacks because they've got more context awareness of you as an organization, and they can sort of use it to sort of scrape data off the internet about your organization, so they're more effective when they're targeting you as an individual. But that, again, is making your organization more aware that these phishing attempts are getting better. We still see a number of attacks come in through LinkedIn requests. Have you ever met that person? If it's someone you've never met, personally, I don't accept them, because I know organizations are targeted through LinkedIn, and sometimes they duplicate someone you're already connected to and just send the same profile again, because they go, oh, they'll know that person, just click accept. And they'll duplicate the whole profile. So I think, helping you to understand how the threat actors are maturing, what types of attacks are being targeted at you as an organization. It comes back to that cyber threat profile we were talking about earlier. What types of AI attacks are being launched at your organization, and how are you going to mitigate against those?
Yep. Do we have any further questions? Nope. In which case, can you join me giving a huge round of applause for our panelists? And thank you for your time. Cool.